Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Good, Bad, and Ugly of Business. I'm your host, Catryn Becker. On this podcast, we talk to business owners, we talk to entrepreneurs, real estate investors, you name it, we want to talk to them because there's so much that we all share, that we've all experienced that we don't necessarily talk about. So that's what we're here to do today. And so in today's episode, it's going to be very interesting. It's something that everybody has to deal with, but it's something that you probably don't enjoy. And so we're really excited to talk to Mike Jesowshek, who's going to say why small business owners need to listen to his podcast called the Small Business Tax Saving Podcast, so they can learn how to save more money, have it more in their pocket, and have him explain all the complicated tax part of it. Because if you're like me, it's not the favorite part of your business day. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you because taxes, right? I mean, what's the saying? Like, the only two things that are certain in this world are death and taxes.
That's true.
So it's typically not something that a lot of people are excited about. I mean, when tax season comes, even not for the, business owner, just every single person, it's like, oh my God, taxes. So what about taxes made you go, yep, that's for me?
Yeah, no, it's funny because when I first started an accounting firm and before I got into accounting, CPA and tax and accounting, that was just my backup plan. So I was in many kind of entrepreneurial runs in the online marketing industry. And then my backup plan, as I was running these businesses and partnering with other people, I was going to school for accounting. And so I was like, okay, well, that's my backup plan. I hope to never need it, but it's there if I need it. And would you imagine I just kind of backed into that plan, and here I am today. But when I first started an accounting firm, a digital cloud-based accounting firm, I wasn't doing taxes, and I was partnering a lot with other accountants that would handle the tax piece. But the problem that I was running into is I would get a client that has a question like, how do I hire my kids in my business? And I would ask the people that we were partnering with, and they'd be like, well, it depends. And I need to know this, I need to know that. And I could just never get a straight answer to bring to our clients without having to go through so many loopholes and dig into and really kind of go through so much to get that answer. And so I did a lot of research on my own and started to really kind of understand this idea of saving taxes, tax strategies that small business owners can get into. And so that's really been my passion, is to say, I know when you're talking about tax strategies, so much of it depends on what is your situation. But when you really look at a tax strategy, let's look at hiring our kids as an example. 90% of that strategy, it doesn't depend. The 90% of that strategy is the same for everybody else. And then we take the remaining 10% of that and tweak it. What kind of business are you in? What type of work could your kids do? Obviously someone that owns a lawn mowing business is going to have different work for their kids than an attorney. And so that's that little 10% that you tweak, but the whole idea and thought of hiring your kids is the same for 90% of the people. And so that was where I set out on a mission to really, where I started the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, was to come out and help bring that 90% to every business owner out there, because so many business owners were missing out on this idea of saving taxes and how do they save taxes, because they couldn't get straight answers. They couldn't find good information out there. And so our goal is to say, okay, let's talk about this idea of taxes. Let's simplify it. Let's bring it to an easy to understand as much as possible way. And so that people can look and be like, oh yeah, like saving taxes is for me. Like that, I am big enough to save on taxes. Because that was the other problem that we ran into is people say, well, I'm too small. Like I can't save taxes, or it's just too much effort and too much time to put into that. And so the whole process, my motivation is to say, no, nobody is too small to save on taxes, and it doesn't take that much effort or time to implement these strategies for the most part. And so that's kind of the passion that I've had, is to say, hey, let's bring that to every small business owner out there as much as possible.
Well, there's something really interesting that you said there that I would love to hear your opinion on. And I think that's around the idea of the strategy piece of it, because some of the CPAs that I know, to have a great strategy, you need some imagination, right? I feel like there needs to be some creativity and some other ways of looking at things other than that they've been taught. And so I almost feel like it seems like a different sort of skill set in knowing the tax law, which is very rigid and immovable in many cases, but then also being able to have the creativity piece to see beyond what's in there and still be within, you know, your legal bounds, but to have those sort of creative strategies. Is that something that you've experienced, or am I just like completely off base?
Yeah, no, completely. And accountants tend to be generally fairly conservative. So accountants are going to be conservative, which then they lead that into their clients. And so we see so many small business owners that come to us that they told, hey, you can't take the home office deduction because that's a red flag to the IRS. And so we see business owners getting scared about audits, getting scared about doing things that are readily available to them just because they maybe have a conservative accountant, or maybe an accountant. You know, the other unique thing that we talk about accountants is sometimes they're afraid to charge their clients. So they don't want to raise prices or charge too much to clients. But they then are unable to do tax planning because they just aren't collecting enough money to do tax planning, but they are afraid to then say, you know, we're going to charge more for tax planning. So we see so many clients miss out on that boat. For one, too conservative, or, you know, someone that's not just thinking about what's in the tax code. And then two, you know, accountants that just don't have the time, energy, or funds coming from their clients to actually do tax planning with their clients. And so I would say, you know, the tax code was written the way it was for a reason, and it is for the majority there to help small business owners. And so what we want to do is say, let's take what is written to us, what was given to us as a gift from the IRS, and take advantage of it, but also be careful, making sure that we dot our I's, cross our T's, have documentation, have support to back it all up. As long as we have that, we don't even have to worry about an IRS audit. I always tell small business owners, don't get scared if the IRS comes knocking. As long as you've dot your I's, cross your T's, have your documents in place, an IRS audit is simply providing the documents the IRS looks for. They're going to say, yep, everything checks out. You're good to go. Moving on. So, you know, this idea of being scared of an IRS audit is, you know, unless you're doing something fishy, unless you're really, you know, in an area that you shouldn't be, you have nothing to worry about with an IRS audit. And so that's the piece that we're saying, that home office example. Every small business owner should be taking advantage of the home office deduction. For anyone to say that's an audit red flag is just crazy. Now, if you're saying that 90% of your home is your home office, yes, that is a red flag. And so, you know, what a lot has happened is there's people out there that abuse tax strategies. There's people out there that take it to a different level, really go deep with it. And those are the people that get caught. And those are the ones that you see headlines of. And that's what starts to scare people, because there are people that have gotten busted taking a home office that they didn't qualify for. But that doesn't mean that the home office is any kind of a bad tax strategy.
And that makes a lot of sense. I also just want to make sure that I heard you correctly when you said a gift from the IRS. I mean, is that actually something that someone a different way to reframe their thought process and think of the IRS more as a partner rather than the boogeyman?
Yeah, no, I always say a partner in a way. You know, the IRS is not going to come out. They're not going to encourage you to take advantage of the tax code, but it was written the way it was for a reason. And so as long as we understand the tax code and how we can take advantage of it and utilize it by law legally, the IRS has no problem with that. But the IRS is not going to be that partner on your team that's like, hey, go do this because that's going to produce less taxes. So yeah, definitely, you know, you know, Congress sets the tax laws. So get from Congress, whoever it might be, but you know, the tax laws are very advantageous for business owners. When you look at it on a flip side, as a W-2 income earner, there's not a ton that you can do from a tax savings standpoint. When you look at the strategies available to a W-2 income earner, there's plenty out there. But when you look at the strategies available to a W-2 income earner versus a business owner, it is significantly less. You know, or business owner, someone that's in real estate, you know, plug in whatever you want there, has so many more strategies available to them than just someone that's working for somebody.
So before I kind of go into the podcast, because I think you do such an amazing job of taking these complicated processes and making it, you know, really bite-sized, really something that people makes it easy to digest, you know, can listen to it on a treadmill, on your way to work, you know, all sorts of different places. And I'm sure everyone listening has already kind of seen that just from what you said, but I'd love to know your opinion, because it's something that, you know, a lot of business owners have been talking about and been thinking about, and that's all of the new IRS agents that have been added. I know that's been something that's been talked about in the news. Do you have any insight into that, and any, should somebody be scared, or is it just, hey, it's nothing to worry about?
Yeah, again, it's just this idea of if you're doing things the right way and following the law, there's nothing to be worried about. And when I saw an increase in IRS agents, if you're a tax accountant or you are a taxpayer that has ever tried to get a hold of somebody in the IRS, you would know that it is extremely difficult. You can be on hold for days sometimes, and it's hard to reach the IRS. So when I see, hey, there's a bunch of new agents, they're doing one on a hiring spree in the IRS, I'm saying, yay, maybe now we can get a hold of somebody. If we have an issue or we have a question, we can call them and we can get an answer and not have to wait on hold for 8 hours to contact that agent. So to me, it's good news there. Now, where a lot of the fear is like, oh, they're going to come after us and they're going
Sure.
to, get everything that we're doing wrong. And I would say, as long as, again, you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's, you have documentation to back up what you're doing, and you're not doing anything shady, I'm not worried at all. I think it's actually a good thing. Now, there are people out there that cross the line, that push, maybe not cross the line, but push it really hard. And for those people, I'd say, yeah, you might want to step up your documentation. If you're hiring your kids and you're simply just writing a check from your business to your kid's bank account, you're not keeping a timesheet, you don't have an employee agreement, you're not keeping, a job description of what they're doing, you might want to back that up and say, okay, we can still send a check from the business bank account to our kids' account and pay them for what they're doing. But maybe we want to put some of that documentation in place. We want to have that timesheet. We want to have, the support to back that up. If you have a business vehicle and you're just taking deductions for it, you're taking everything, but you're not tracking mileage, and what is the business purpose of your travel? Well, maybe you might want to start doing that now. You might want to start keeping, a mileage log. And if you're going out to meals with friends and family that happen to be clients and you're not keeping receipts or not writing the business purpose on the receipts, well, maybe you want to start doing that now. So it doesn't change anything that we're doing as far as a tax strategy standpoint, where we would do everything exactly the same. But if you're not doing it correctly, if you're not really protecting and buttoning everything up, you might want to start doing that now. Because if the IRS comes knocking, you can go out, you can hire your kids. That's totally legal. But if you come up and the IRS says, hey, can you provide some proof for that payment that you made to your kids and the work they're doing, and you just send them an empty envelope with nothing in it, they're going to say, okay, that's not allowed. That deduction's being erased now. But if you have the support and proof to back it up, they're fine with it. And so it's just kind of, buttoning everything up now and just making sure that you're doing things correctly, which I would say people should be doing regardless of how many IRS agents there are out there.
A great point. And also, I think there's a mindset thing, and maybe this is not for everybody, but from what I've seen, and I think I come from this perspective because as a W-2 who has moved into being a small business owner, still having that mindset of that, like, I didn't worry about taxes as a W-2 employee until maybe February. Like, most of my taxes were always done in March because, just had to make the deadline. And a lot of people I talk to have made a similar journey where they have left the corporate world and have gone into becoming entrepreneurs for themselves. So what advice do you have for people, or ways that they can maybe habit stack to have tax readiness be more of a year-round endeavor versus a scramble at the last minute? Like, how can they help themselves to be better prepared?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. When somebody hears the word tax, I want people to think about tax planning first and tax prep and filing last. Tax prep and filing required by law, very important. We want to make sure that's being done correctly, but that is an after the fact item. When we file our taxes, we're reporting income from the prior year. We're recording expenses from our business for the prior year. And so when we look at, okay, when we think about taxes, what comes first? It's that tax planning piece. Tax planning comes between January and December. Once December 31st hits, the majority of tax strategies are out the door. Now, there's some things we can do after year end, but once 12/31 hits, most of the things that we can do to save on taxes are gone. And so we want people to think of, when I hear the word tax, and what should we be thinking about all year long? It's that tax planning piece. What are ways I can reduce my income? What are some tax strategies I can implement so that at the end of the year comes, we're just taking that information, putting it in a form and sending it up to the state agencies, sending it up to the IRS. So I think the importance thing is yeah, as you become a business owner, and when I say business owner, you don't have to have, some big corporate office with employees or anything like that. You're making 1099 income, you're a business owner. You have a side gig, you're a business owner. And so, it doesn't matter what size you are as when it comes to that, if you're making income that's subject to self-employment taxes, you're now a business owner and you need to be thinking about what you can be doing. And so the first step to that always is bookkeeping. Having a solid set of books is a key part to that, because you don't know how much you need to save in taxes. You don't know that number if you don't know how your business is performing.
Right?
Yeah. So, that's a key piece that just goes along with the tax planning, is just having consistent activity. What is on a regular basis? What is your income? What does your profit and loss look like? And what type of planning do we want to do for that? Because the planning that we do for someone that's making $100,000 might be a little bit different than someone that's making $1 million. And so we want to know where you're at that level. Now,
Sure.
I will say though, the tax strategies that the $1 million person is implementing, 95% of them, the $100,000 person will implement as well. And so I want to make sure that people don't think of tax planning as, oh, I got to be making a lot of money.
Yeah, I gotta be the super wealthy.
As long as you're making $1,000 a year, there's tax planning opportunities available there.
I have a couple of different thoughts, but my coach and mentor, JT Fox, he does a lot of live coaching, and I've had the pleasure of being in the room a lot of times with these live coaching. And so he's asking these different business owners, okay, well, what was your numbers? And it's astounding how many people are like, I don't know, it was about this or around this. And I'm sure you see that all the time where people just don't know their numbers.
Oh yeah. And it's especially where people misstep a lot too. If you're doing your bookkeeping and you're doing that profit and loss in January and February so that you can do your tax return for that, you're rushing, you're missing things. You might be taking deductions for things that you're not allowed to, or you might be missing half the deductions that you are allowed to because you're just trying to rush and get things together. And so, I've seen so many business owners throughout the years that we're working with, and, we're like, we need documents. We need your P&L. It's time to file your tax return. We need that information. And they're just kind of like whipping it together. It's like, okay, here you go. And I see that, and I'm just like, there's so many opportunities that were probably missed because they're not thinking about those meals. They're not thinking about the different opportunities that they had to implement these tax strategies. They just want to get taxes done, and they want us off the plate because taxes are scary for people. Nobody likes doing taxes. No one likes thinking about taxes. And so they push it off. They rush it together so they can just get it off their plate and not think about it again until next January. Where that whole process, that whole way of doing taxes is not helpful, and it's not healthy for small business owners.
And when you think about it in terms of tax savings, there really is a lot of impetus there to make them want to do that, because you think about all the time and energy we spend in other areas thinking of how we can make more money, which obviously is a huge part of the equation. But if you can reduce your expenses, like boom, boom, win-win, this is really can make a huge difference in a business owner's daily life.
Yeah. And, I always hear people say, the tax strategy, it's not about just one tax strategy. We don't implement one strategy and done. It's a culmination of tax strategies. And I oftentimes hear people say, well, it seems like a lot of effort. That home office deduction to save $1,000 in taxes just seems like a lot of effort. And I say, well, it's not a lot of effort, but it does take a little bit of time and effort to put in up front. But think about the savings from that. $1,000 in year one is just $1,000. But what if you run this business for 20 years? Does $20,000 seem a little worth it to put in maybe an hour's worth of work?
Because this one strategy.
Yeah. Then this is just one strategy. And so people think about it as a one-time thing where it's compounding, it's adding together. And then we're adding this strategy with another strategy, and it's happening year after year after year. Then those savings start to be like, oh yeah, let's do that. And you get a lot of business owners that have been in business for 10 years and say, I've never hired my kids. I've never thought about an S corporation. I have never funded a retirement account. In 10 years that they've been running their business, and we're looking at, okay, you probably just paid over $100,000 in taxes that you could have saved. Now, let's not look at the past, and let's not dwell on that, but let's do it moving forward. Let's start that process now, because think of that compounding. What could you have done with $100,000 compounding in the last 10 years? That would have been $250,000 today that you're sitting on. And so it's just kind of bringing that concept and idea to people. And then you get that aha moment, like, oh yeah, there is a lot of planning opportunities. It doesn't take much effort. It takes a little bit of work. Any kind of, if you're making more money or if you're saving money on something, it takes some effort to get to that point. But it's so much worth it. And it's also not as hard as people tend to think about it. So when you go back to this idea of tax planning versus tax paying or tax filing, I hope that people hear the word tax and instead of getting like scared and nervous and having to rush and do things, that they start thinking about like, oh yeah, tax planning is something I can do now in strategies and things that I can implement now to save on taxes. And that should be exciting versus scary and something that's more of a weight on their shoulders. So that's my hope, that we can change that point of view and change that focus of small business owners.
And I'd also think that it sounds like you need to have a tax planner and a tax preparer, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the same person, or to assume that the same person could do that might be a false thought process. I was in a networking group, and the person who was the accountant, we didn't see her for the months of pretty much March, April, and October, maybe even September, where it was just, oh, it's tax season. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. I'm so busy. And I think hearing that also puts, that idea in people's subconscious of, well, how do I start tax planning? Because if we're waiting to, 12/31, as you mentioned, it's too late. You already need to be doing it ahead of the time. So kind of what's your thought process on that, and how should people prepare better, and what should they look for when they're talking to a tax planner versus a tax preparer?
Yeah,
I know that was a lot of questions in one. Sorry.
No, that's a good point. I think a tax preparer is not always a tax planner or strategist. A tax strategist is not always a tax preparer. They can be, and there is some crossover. I think the important thing is to ask questions about tax planning strategies and understand, what do you have? If you're using a tax preparer and you've been using them for 10 years, are they a tax planner as well? And understanding whether they are or not. Because if they are, great, let's utilize them. Let's make sure that you're adding on that service to, whatever you're paying for an annual or a monthly fee. Let's add on that tax planning piece so you can get some advice in that area. But if that's not something they do, don't try to force them into it. Don't try to get them into that. They might be really good at preparing taxes, but don't have the time or effort to do tax planning or learn about the strategies that are out there. And so it's understanding, what do you have, who are you working with, and then implementing that or utilizing that to your advantage in that. When it comes to tax planning and tax savings, it's a lot about a knowledge. I would tell clients or tell business owners, I want you to understand what you're implementing. As a tax strategist, I don't want to just say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hire your kids. We're going to save $10,000 in taxes by hiring your kids. They're going to pay no income tax on that income, and I'm just going to do it all for you. I would never want that to happen. Instead, I would say, I want you to understand what we're doing. I'm going to tell you, hey, that's what we're going to do, but I'm going to tell you how we're going to do it. I'm going to tell you what legwork I need you to do. I want you to feel comfortable with this strategy, so that if you're telling a friend, a family member about this idea of hiring your kids, that you feel comfortable talking about it. You can say, hey, I don't know all the details and the laws, but I do know, here's in general how this strategy works. And so that's that learning piece. You have to put in some effort to learn the strategies. But where I see people run into problems all the time on our podcast as well, as people are listening and they're saying, I love the content, but then they never do anything with it. They just learn they know about hiring their kids. They know about home office. They know about S corporations, but they don't ever do it in their business. And so that's the second piece I always say, is implementing. Learn and then implement. And so I encourage everybody to, and this doesn't have to be with tax planning. This can be anything you're learning, any kind of podcast that you're listening to, is set a time on your calendar at the beginning of every month. Pick a date that's consistent every month that you say, hey, I'm going to check back on a note in my phone. And when you're listening to these podcasts, you're listening to interviews, you're watching YouTube videos, just make notes in your phone like, oh, hire kids. I talked to Catryn about, listening about this strategy, find financial advisor, whatever it might be. Sure. Make notes in your phone. And then when that item comes up on your calendar at the beginning of every month or wherever makes sense for you, start to implement that. Like, oh, hiring your kids, heard about that on a podcast. I'm actually going to look into actually doing that. And so, it's hard when you're in the car, you're listening to a podcast, you think, oh, great idea. Let's hire my kids. Then you get to the office, you get to the client, and you forget about it, and you're moving on with your life. But write these things down and have a planned action to come back to it at some point in time, to revisit that, to actually do the important piece is actually implementing it.
But isn't that true of just life in general? I mean, like, how many people know that it's better to not eat McDonald's, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it's better to have, more healthy, unprocessed food, but it's the doing piece that we get so hung up on. But that's a whole nother topic for another day. That's not quite in the scope. But the podcast that you have is really incredible. And I wanted to go through some of the titles that you have just to give people listening an idea of the breadth of work that is there, the breadth of information that is so helpful. And you've got so many great freebies on your website to help people to learn. I mean, you're very, very generous with your time and knowledge. And so just thank you so much for that. But I'm just going to read a couple ones. So we have Unlock Your Business Potential, Exploring Non-Qualified Retirement Plans, Rental Property Tax Essentials, Top Tips, Updates for 2023 that you need to know, which is great. I mean, there's so many people who think, oh, I need to get into real estate investing. I can do, fix and flips and needing to know that stuff is so important. Cracking the Code, Corporate Transparency Act Explained for Small Business Owners, Top 10 Mid-Year Tax Saving Strategies, Every Small Business. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Like, do you ever worry about running out of things to talk about?
Well, no, because I think, the tax code is how many thousands of pages long. So there's always things that we can talk about. And we revisit a lot of things too, as well, because, I'm constantly learning as well. I am learning tax. I'm attending conferences. I'm listening to podcasts. I'm going through CPE credits. I'm learning as well. And so there's a lot of times where I'm like, oh, you know what? I want to add this little piece into that tax strategy. Or, as we all know, tax law is constantly changing. For some reason, Congress can't leave it alone. So there's always these new tweaks and turns that we have to update as well. And so, no, I mean, there's plenty of content to write about. What I want to make sure is important is that small business owners don't get stuck in the weeds about things that maybe don't matter to them. And so I try to keep the content in an area that is going to be relevant for a very large amount of our base, and not talking to the 2% out there that maybe have a specific category for them. So that's I would say is the hard part. Is we can talk about a lot of these topics, but making sure it's relevant to the general population of small business owners is sometimes the more tweaking piece.
Absolutely. And one of the cool sort of specialty episodes that you have on the podcast is the Q&A piece, where listeners message you, come to the website, your clients, and put down their questions that they want answered. I'd love to know kind of what are some of the more common mistakes or common questions that people tend to ask the most.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when it comes to the questions that come up in general are type of entity structures, like I have we're going into a partnership. How should we structure that? I'm looking to, they ask about specific strategies. So they hear our Hiring Our Kids episode and they're like, well, what about this? Does this situation change anything? But when it comes down to a lot of the planning comes down to this idea of maximizing deductions. That's when we look at hiring our kids, when we look at taking a home office, all of that's our deductions. And so we look at maximizing deductions. And so it comes back to a very simple concept of this idea of maximizing deductions and what that means. And so when these questions come up, we're always circling back to a similar concept. What is ordinary and necessary in your business? Understanding pre-tax versus after-tax dollars, and how, as a business owner, you can move traditional after-tax spending into pre-tax spending. A W-2 business, a W-2 employee doesn't have that option. If you have a home office as a W-2 employee, you get no deduction. It doesn't matter. You're using your home office, but W-2 employee, you get no advantage to that. As a business owner, now those things that you were typically paying after-tax dollars with as a W-2 employee, you can move into a business expense. And now you get a pre-tax deduction for those same items that you were spending anyways. So it's this concept of so many people will hear from their accountant, go buy a truck or go buy a new office computer or go buy a new desk, whatever it might be, to get deductions in and save on taxes. We're saying, no, that's not the we don't want you to buy things that you don't need. Now, if you need a new truck or whatever it might be for your business, of course, like let's take advantage of the tax deductions you get from that. But when we talk about maximize deductions, we're just saying, how can we take spending that you're already doing, but now instead of doing it after tax spending, how can we do it as pre-tax spending? And so a lot of the Q&A that comes in is just going through this concept. And that concept is easy for me to say, but when you put it in practice, it just sometimes people get hung up in certain areas. And so it's kind of ironing out those different details and specific situations that come up with individuals to help it make sense for them.
Sure. Absolutely. So, I mean, you've mentioned, going through having all these different strategies. So if someone is looking to work with you, what can they expect that process to look like? And maybe, if there's any differences that you do that maybe other tax planners don't, but just what can they expect and what sort of is that that process like?
Yeah. So the first thing I always say is come to our podcast. In our podcast, we do a weekly episode on the podcast. We do a blog post along with that. We do a YouTube video along with that. So whether you like to read, watch, or listen, there's an opportunity that every strategy we talk about, you can learn in whatever way you like to learn. After that, we have what we call our tax minimization program. So it's a little bit more training and saying, okay, you like this idea of hiring your kids. And by the podcast episode, the blog post that we do, you have enough information to hire your kids. But what if you want some templates that we have, or you want to go to that 10% of saying, okay, here are what my business is, and here's my kid's situation. Can you let me know what can they do in my business, or what does this look like specifically for me? Then we have kind of a pro training program where you have access to our team. We help you out. We provide deeper dive training into all of these strategies that just wouldn't make sense on a podcast episode. Sure. And access to our team, but still more of a do-it-yourself activity. You're still going to implement it. You just have us there to lean on, to ask questions, to guide on. And so that's our tax minimization program. We have a new software coming out that's going to create a tax blueprint for people. And so that's kind of that next step process. And then for those that are saying, no, like, I need you to handle my bookkeeping, my taxes. Like, I want you to be much more hands-on in my business. We have a partner firm that we work with that handles kind of more that full service accounting and tax work. So those are kind of the steps that I say is, like, start out, get into our content. If you resonate with what we're saying, then that means that you can really, start to get in that idea of saving taxes. Look at our podcast. If you want more, go to our tax minimization program. If you say, hey, I need someone to actually do bookkeeping, I need someone to actually do my tax filing and more hands-on tax planning with me, we have a partner firm that we can get you in with as well.
So I have one last question for you. The hot thing of 2023 is ChatGPT and the more accessibility of AI to the regular person. I mean, the AI has been around a really long time and has been, implemented in many different industries and different technologies. Are you seeing any change in what you do with the more accessibility of AI? And is there anything that you think people need to watch out for looking forward?
Yeah, I definitely use AI a lot in the things that we're doing. It's not necessarily as a resource for me to learn tax strategies or to ask tax questions. The way I use AI, at least in its current state, is to help format the content that we're producing and making sure that it is in an easy to understand way, helping to write, think of ideas for new podcast episodes, helping to think of outlines of what we should be talking about in podcast episodes. So we're using it a lot in that area. I think there's a ton of potential to say, okay, here are some tax codes. Here's a tax code. Can you help, using AI to help bring that down and easier to understand activity and easier to understand words? I think the important piece is, and I have tested out AI a lot and saying, how do I hire my kids? Or, how do I do certain things? Or is this allowed in the tax code? And some of the information is great. It says it better than I could and puts it in a format better than I could. But some of the information is blatantly wrong. And so it's important to, if you're utilizing it for an information gathering and not necessarily a new style of writing or changing content in a SEO friendly way or whatever it might be, I think you just need to make sure that you're you're backing that up, making sure you have somebody that can read that and be like, yeah, this is correct, or no, this is blatantly false information. Because we had a situation like that where we just recently did a podcast episode, or have one coming up, on kitty tax, and we were asking Chat GPT for some information about that, and the information they were giving was not correct. And so it was close, and it had some really good pieces into it, but that there was that one piece that was missing that changed it completely. And if someone ran with that, they'd be in a bad situation. So I think as it matures, it's going to be super helpful. Right now, I think it's got its time and place into various different techniques and workflows into your everyday life in your business. I just don't know if using it as a research tool is the best use of it. Maybe it's a good starting point, but having something that you can bounce that off of as well is going to be key.
Absolutely. I think that was great insight. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time and sharing all of this. It's been really great. Is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to share before we
No,
wrap
I
up?
think this has been great. If you're looking to find more information about us, you want to learn more about tax savings, just go to taxsavingspodcast.com and have a ton of information out there. But it's been really fun. And just remember, as a small business owner, sometimes you feel alone. Sometimes you feel like there's no one to help you out there. There's a ton of content out there. There's a ton of people that are looking to help out. And it's just this importance of, when it comes to taxes, nobody is too small for tax planning. So if you're in a situation where you're like, he's talking about home office, he's talking about hiring your kids, like, that's not for me. I'm only a side gig Uber driver. Doesn't matter. Wherever you are in your business, tax planning is there and available to you.
And it's going to save you money. It might cost you some to get started, but in the end, you're definitely going to have an ROI.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the listeners. Appreciate you for being here. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe, do all of the things. And if you have any questions on future things that you would like to learn about, reach out to us, and I would love to find a guest that can speak on that topic. So until next time, everyone, have a great day.